Harman Dayal of The Athletic joins the show now. He'll be co-hosting with Faber on Friday, as he usually does, but Harman Dayal joins us courtesy of our friends over at Zephyr Epic. You can use promo code Hockey Season, capital H, capital S, all one word, Hockey Season. That will get you $5 off your order at ZephyrEpic.com, ZEPHYR Epic. Check them out on all platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, what have you. They've got you covered for all of your trading card needs. Free shipping on any order over $50. Be sure to go check out Zephyr Epic. Harman, how are you doing today?
I'm great, man. I'm excited. I had a conversation with Pod Colson yesterday to wrap up a feature that I'm working on. So that's going to be dropping tomorrow. And I'm at the story now where I'm sure you can relate, where you got all the material you wanted. And now it's just about how you want to piece it all together. It's the most exciting part about writing and putting stories together. So today's going to be a lot of fun.
Awesome. And let's start there. Let's start with Pod Colson. You don't have to, divulge too much and tell me everything in your story, but overall, what have you made of Pod Colson's game from the start of the year to post call up? Like, what have you made of Pod Colson's game?
Yeah, I think overall, I think he'd be the first one to tell you that it's been a disappointing, tough season. In fact, that's exactly what he sort of said to me, was that it's been a really tough year for him to navigate through. In the earlier parts of the season, he started the year in the season opener when we were both in Edmonton on Horvat's line, and it felt like through the first few games, he was actually showing legitimate strides in his playmaking. The problem was that early on, I think he didn't get any bounces in terms of, I remember that season opener against Edmonton, one of the best games I've ever seen Pod Colson play. He didn't register a point because Pod Colson was setting up Horvat in the slot, and Horvat, who's been on a shooting bender the entire year, somehow missed all those chances. Now, I'm not saying it was, it's Horvat's fault or anything. That's just the way the bounces went that game and through the first 4 games. And so when the production wasn't there, then Pod Colson was sent further down the lineup. That's, I think, when you saw him lose some confidence. Then briefly he was called up, sent up the lineup again to play with Pettersson. And again, same sort of thing. We saw that Hoglander, Pod Colson, Pettersson line. They dominated playing chances, but they couldn't bury and capitalize on them. So Boudreau had no choice but to essentially send him back down the lineup. And again, that's, I think, where he started to lose confidence. And one of the biggest takeaways that I've had in getting to know him a little bit over the last couple of seasons is that Pod Colson is very, very hard on himself when he makes mistakes. He's very hard on himself when he's struggling. And I think one of the biggest lessons that he's had to learn is to be patient, to understand it's a process and be easier on himself mentally, because he was beating himself up. He told me straight up that he started to think, oh my God, am I a bad player? Right. And that's where, when I asked him about spending time in Abbotsford, he said that the biggest sort of benefit wasn't necessarily working on a specific part of his game in terms of wall battles or defensive play or anything systems wise. It was having the chance to work with the Sedins a lot, which he's still doing to this day, speaking with them daily, on having conversations, learning the mental and being more patient, and learning how to grapple with the highs and lows that come with being an effective NHL player. Because look, confidence is, you talk to any player who's producing and you ask them, oh, what's going well right now? They're kind of just like, I don't really know. I'm just playing off my instincts. And I think that's something Pod Colson lost. I think since he's come back, he's playing with more of that confidence, which he was able to build by producing in Abbotsford. And so now I'm just kind of curious to see if he can hopefully find some traction, because he is starting to play better, but he's still in a situation where against Ottawa, for example, he only played 8 minutes, right? So is that enough of a window, enough of an opportunity for him to start producing and really start to take steps in building his game back up?
So, with building his game back up, what do you think the best course of action is? Because we just had this conversation earlier in the show about Aiden McDonough. And I'm saying with McDonough, and we'll get to McDonough in a sec, I want your opinion on the question too. But with McDonough, I look at it and say he's got to play with a top 6 player. Is Pod Colson ready for that opportunity again? Because you just said it, like he had it and he couldn't finish, so Boudreau had no choice but to lower him in the lineup. Look, he's a North-South player. Talkett loves his North-South players. Does he get that opportunity again in the final stretch of the season here?
Yeah, it's going to be tough because there are so many wingers that are vying for opportunities, especially we haven't even spoken about a guy like Garland who's been playing with Oman and Joshua. And credit to those guys because those two have been playing well together and that's worked as a line. But do you think Connor Garland is happy in general about playing with fourth line play? I'm sure he'd love to be playing up the lineup with his best friend JT Miller again, right? So with Podkolzin, it's interesting because when Kravtsov first came and they played together on a line, I thought Kravtsov was starting to build with his game, and there seemed to be some chemistry forming. But Kravtsov, in my opinion, the last few games has been slow. I don't think that line like I don't think his line mates have given Podkolzin enough, if I'm being honest. And so I do wonder if at some point you look at Phil DiGiuseppe's role in the top six next to JT Miller and Brock Besser, and I wonder if you sort of go, that's an opportunity for Podkolzin to eventually get a chance there. But I don't know how Rick Tocchet is thinking, right? Because but Podkolzin also got, what was it, one game next to Pettersson. I think it was against Dallas, and that was a short-lived experiment before we saw the line blender again. I don't know what Rick Tocchet is thinking. I will say that with Aiden McDonough, I'm not sure that I'd immediately thrust him into a top six role. I think with somebody like Podkolzin, right? Like, assuming when McDonough comes that Podkolzin is still playing decently, that he's not struggling, I think he's probably earned that chance ahead of McDonough. I think McDonough should get that opportunity at some point before the season ends. But, the way I'm looking at it is I wouldn't hesitate to give McDonough the sort of Adam Gaudette treatment. If you remember a few years ago, I think he signed at the end of what was the 2018-19 season, and he started in a bottom six role. And that was more about, let's just give you a taste of the NHL. I wouldn't mind if McDonough first started in a bottom six role, and then maybe with 2-3 games left in the season, then he gets a top six role.
Okay, I like that. I like that. Now, Chris and I had this conversation on Friday. The coaching bump, the new coach bump with Rick Tocchet. Look, a lot of people talking about how it feels a little more real, Harman. Do you buy it at least a little bit that this is the new Canucks under Rick Tocchet?
Well, I buy that their process has looked better in this second half than it did under Boudreau, because I think under Boudreau, they were being bolstered heavily by how elite Thatcher Demko was playing. Now, Demko's played really well too since Tocchet has emerged, but you look at some of the underlying data, and this Canucks team under Tocchet now is controlling play a lot better than they were under Boudreau, where it felt like it was A, goaltending, and then B, special teams that was bailing them out. When you're leaning that heavily on special teams and goaltending, that's usually not an infrastructure that you can rely on to hold up over a long sort of sample. And that's exactly what Alvin alluded to at one point in the season when they looked back at that run under Boudreau. Now, the thing that you can't account for, which I've been speaking a lot about, is that these games don't have any pressure, right? I can't I can't tell myself with certainty that this is the new Canucks, that we're going to see this version for all 82 games next season, because we're at a point in the season now where the pressure's off of them. There's no expectations. They're not fighting for the playoffs, and it's a big difference when you're trying to hold a lead, for example, when you are in a spot where another team's trying to catch you in the standings and you need this W, or you're playing against a divisional opponent and you know that this is a 4-point game and that you'd love to close it out, as opposed to holding a lead in a game where it's game 68, you're like 10 points out of the playoffs and you're like a month away from the season ending. Like, those are two totally different circumstances, and how it tests you mentally. And we saw, right, like the run that they had under Bruce coming into the season, everybody was talking about, oh, we can't have a slow start. We've had years in a row. We're ready. We're not gonna blow a tire right out of the gate. And what happened, right? There were 0-5 on that first road trip, blowing multi-goal leads and still losing in regulation at a rate which they set an NHL record for. I mean, I still don't know whether this group is mentally resilient enough to sustain this type of form. They're gonna have to prove it to me.
Cautiously optimistic. I like it. I also think that, it's going to be a different group next year to some extent. So I think that's the other thing to consider. Final one from me, Harman. the goaltending depth chart. Lots been talked about the backup next year. What direction would you like to see them go? Because I just talked about Spencer Martin is kind of what this organization would like to work out as the backup next year. Keep him around as the backup, and then maybe if Demko goes down, you call up Seelovs. That was the take I gave earlier. What's your take on the goaltending situation heading into next year?
Yeah, I think that sounds pretty smart to me. I mean, it'll be interesting because I think the one consideration that I haven't spent as deep a time looking at as I'd like to this point is sort of understanding what's best for Silovs' development. My initial thought was like you in the sense that Martin showed really well down the stretch that he could competently back up Demko. Even at the start of this season, he was playing pretty solid hockey. His game only started to crumble when he was thrust into the starter's position because Demko went down with injury. And look, that happens to guys, right? That happens to a lot of NHL backups where they can play well when they're tapped on the shoulder to stand in the blue paint let's say every fourth game. But then all of a sudden, if you rely on them for 3 out of 4 games, now you've got the pressure of this team has to make the playoffs, and it's all riding on your shoulders. And this is one of the worst defensive teams in all of hockey. That environment, you can understand how it could crumble a goaltender's confidence. So I definitely think, given the team's cap constraints too, it'd be ideal if the Canucks can find a way to work it out with Martin, knowing that Seelovs is also a sort of competent number 3 who can step up in a pinch to play a few games here or there, because it's not cheap to find quality NHL backups anymore. We saw with how much the Canucks, and I know it was a little bit different because they were more looking for a 1B than a traditional backup, but you saw the way the Canucks had to spend in Holtby during the 2021 campaign. But even beyond that, like a lot of NHL backups cost in the $2 million range these days. And you look at the Canucks' other needs on the blue line, what they may need in terms of another, say, like a third line centerman for next season. It'd be a benefit for them to be able to go cheap and go with Demko and, you know, Martin's $750,000 cap hit, and knowing that you have Seelovs' dirt cheap ELC behind as well. So I think that would preferably be your first choice. I tend to agree with your take there.
Awesome. That's all I wanted to hear is you agreeing with my take. Harman, thank you for doing this on short notice, man. The listeners will see you on Friday.
Of course, man. Thanks.